Folks are joining now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sean Gio from the Partnership for Strong Communities, and I'm going to give folks a minute or two longer to join before we get started. And while we're doing that, I'll make some introductory remarks. So again, this is Tipping Point, Connecticut's virtual affordable housing conference for this year. I'm Sean Gio. I'm the policy director at the Partnership for Strong Communities. And if this is your first session for the day, this conference is a series of about 30 sessions over the next 4.5 days now, with local, state, and national experts talking about the challenges, sharing best practices, and really thinking about what the key next steps are to expanding housing options in Connecticut. If you want to tweet about the conference, you can do that and please use hashtag tippingpoint2020 on Twitter. And again, this session is Montgomery Mill, a case study of mixed income transit-oriented development. And before we get started, if I can advance my slides.
Drum roll, please.
There we are. I just want to thank our sponsors and our leading sponsors for the session, Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and Melville Charitable Trust. And we'll try to move this forward again. There we are. And also thank the Connecticut Department of Housing, as well as Housing Enterprises, Inc. and Whittlesey. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker, and I will just stop sharing my screen for a minute. And so first of all, I just want to say the Montgomery Mill project development is really something that I've been following for years. I'm very excited. For many years, I lived near Windsor Locks in Windsor, and really saw this property as so critical. And I'm sure as folks in Windsor Locks feel so critical to the success of the area, and really a key property in the success of the Hartford line, our newer commuter rail. So to talk about this on how this really monumental project came to be, today we have the CEO of Beacon Communities, Dara Kovel. So Dara, you can take it away.
Yeah, sure, Sean. And Emily Bouton, who is a development director at Beacon Communities, who did the last half of the work of this project. Her predecessor, Thatcher Tiffany, some of you may know from Beacon, but also sort of initiated the work with me. And it's really nice to be here with you all.
Dara?
Yeah, Sean.
Sorry, I told you this was I'd screw up right off the bat. So
that's okay.
I forgot. I have
the informality. We're just making it up. Good.
I have a few housekeeping items I just got to cover quick. So I just want to let everyone know that the session is being recorded, and we're going to make all these recordings available to conference attendees. So you may notice that you entered muted. So please remain on mute. Unless the presenter has asked you to unmute, perhaps to ask a question. If you have a technology question while we're going through this, you could select the chat icon on the control panel and send a chat to me, the session leader. Sean Gio again, you may see me as PSC Zoom, that my PSC Zoom meeting is my handle on there. And a few minutes before the end of the session, I'll launch a poll to get some feedback from you on this session. So thanks, Dara. Apologize. Go.
No, not at all. Don't be silly. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm just looking through the participant list here, and there's some familiar names here and some unfamiliar ones. So it's nice to be here. Again, I'm Dara Kovel with Beacon Communities, and Emily Bouton is with me, who was oversaw the project from its beginning of construction, or actually through a lot of the closing, and then the construction and stabilization process. So we're going to walk you through how Montgomery Mill came to be, and then what it is. And I assume we'll shortly be sharing a screen. Do you want to?
Yep, we'll need to start that right
it
now.
So while Emily puts it up, I'll just share with folks that behind me is Montgomery Mill. This is we have a lot of really glamorous pictures of Montgomery and some really great videos that we can make available. But this happened to be, I was driving by the site a few months ago, actually, just on my way somewhere, and the train was going by the front of the building, and it had just been completed, and the renovation was all glamorous. This was right before we had the ribbon cutting about a month and a half ago, and there was a rainbow. I'm not sure if you can see that over my head, but there was a rainbow. So that was sort of, for me, an articulation of the amazing goodwill and support that this project has gotten. So I will just begin by framing how it came to be, because this was under the this was under the Malloy administration that this project kind of was initiated, and most of the funding commitments were made. But obviously the Lamont administration has continued to be interested in transit-oriented development, and we think this is a great story of what can be achieved when many state agencies and local government leadership all kind of get together and figure out what's important, and then like mountains can be moved and great things can happen. So the origin story of Montgomery really began with a transit-oriented development staffing group that kind of was convened between the Department of Transit, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, the Department of Housing, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, Department of Economic and Community Development, and the Office of Policy and Management, all groups, all those agencies convened, I would say, as early as 2012, 2013, to start talking about how to kind of further and jumpstart the state's transit-oriented investments. And that was as Malloy was making a lot of commitments about spending on infrastructure and trying to find ways to both make sure that ridership increased in those locations where there were stops, how to prioritize where to build those stops, thinking about the commuter rail from New Haven to Springfield, and a variety of other things. And for those of you who are familiar with development work in Connecticut, you will know that in Meriden, the Meriden stop on the line was actually the first project or series of projects to come out of that informal agency collaboration, where DECD and DEEP and CHFA and DOH all kind of participated in ensuring that a 9% tax credit deal got funded, and a huge water retention and flood control investment was made around the park in downtown Meriden, and a variety of other things, including a brand new transit stop that happened there. So that was all back in, I want to say, 2014, 15. Montgomery Mill and this particular location had been on the minds and in the kind of eyes of state leaders for some time, partly because it was this massive building in the heart of downtown Windsor Locks, and had been, partly or completely vacant for decades, and had really fallen on really tough times. So it was, and I think we have some pictures we can show you later. It had been, had very small, a couple of occupants, and had been purchased by someone who didn't really know what to do with it. Had a couple of development companies had taken a run at trying to redevelop it, but it is an incredibly challenging site, and Emily can walk you through some of those aspects. But the thing that kind of really triggered the next, the momentum, the catalyst for moving it to the next stage, is that the first selectman, actually the predecessor to Chris Kervick, who is now the first selectman, and then Chris, sort of convinced the state to move the train station from south of the site, about a mile south of the property, into downtown. And we'll show you all this in sort of site plans and stuff like this, but this is just, again, to frame sort of how this came to be. That move sort of made it an incredibly, kind of was a signal to us, and to Beacon as a commitment to that the state was really going to put its money into the heart of the downtown. And so Beacon got into contract for the site, I want to say in 2016. Do I have that right? And then started assembling the financing. But I'm going to hand it to Emily now, and if we can, you can walk through the slides, and I'll just add color commentary as you go along.
Yeah, that sounds good. Oops. All right. Can everyone see this slide? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, Dara, you want me to start and then you can just chime in?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So as Dara said, Montgomery Mill is the adaptive reuse of a historic mill building. It's a huge, huge building that you could see from the picture that was just on the screen. And we converted it into 160 units of apartments. About half of them are straight market rate, and the other half are restricted in some form or another to households that make between 25 and 80% of area median income. There are 5 tiers, including the market rate tier, which was important to the state and certainly allowed our financing to work. Our leasing team has had some frustrations over the lease up, getting the right people into the right buckets. But we're really, really happy at the different opportunities and options that we were able to offer here. And then the pictures in the background here are just some of the interior finished units. And this walks through the different sources involved. As Dara said, there were a ton of different state agencies that needed to sort of come together and recognize that Montgomery was a priority for the state. And their support came in the form of financing or historic tax credits or sort of negotiation with different agencies, particularly deep. You'll see on this site plan that there's a state park on the site. And so there was lease negotiations involved. The town of Windsor Locks created a public park at one end of the site as well. So negotiations with them too. So it was definitely an effort that took a lot of different agencies and departments, but successfully made it work.
Yeah, and just to add a few other things, you'll see the exciting transformation here. But this was a wire mill that existed, that had been very operational. Actually, originally a thread mill, and then a wire converted to wire and tinsel mill over the decades, starting in the late 1800s, and it is when it's incredible building, obviously, but surrounded on one side by the Bridge Street, 2 sides by Water Canal on one side and the river on the other, and then, as Emily alluded to, this park on the north side. So one of the reasons that it had struggled to be refinanced, like why it had been so difficult to put together, is because the access was really challenging for emergency vehicle access, as well as just regular pedestrian and resident access, but also because it has this public park that you need to create sort of a public right-of-way through, that the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection have a kind of a lease or easement on the pathway that leads up to the park through what would otherwise be private land, and it's in a floodplain. So the lower boundary of the property is, the lowest point on the site is like in the 5-year floodplain. And Emily will walk you through how sort of the design addressed the flood access, what have you. But there were that, in addition to the seriously deteriorated condition of the building, made it, and of course, a huge environmental bill that was pending to clean it up to residential standards, were all things that made it really, really challenging.
Here's some pictures of what the building looked like when we first got involved. Obviously, it was in pretty rough shape, but you can tell his good bones. This picture over in this bottom right is our favorite because it literally looks like marsh or something. I don't think the picture's here, but there was a tree growing out of the cement on one of the floors. So it wasn't in good shape, but fortunately, you know, now it looks completely different. Here's some more. And then as Dara said, she touched on a lot of this, but one of the reasons why Montgomery was so important to the state is that it is in such an ideal location for transit-oriented development. So it's right downtown in Windsor Locks. It's next to this state park trail, and it's adjacent to this train station that she mentioned at the beginning. And I'll go back to that site plan, but here we wanted to show you where the site is located in relation to this planned train station. So the Connecticut River obviously is right here, and to the left is this canal, and Montgomery is right at this intersection. Here's Main Street of Windsor Locks. Here's the State Park Trail running along the canal. And then you'll see here, this is where the train station is planned. So it'll be easy access to the residents that live there. And another part of the planned train station is this, there's going to be sort of like a multi-use pedestrian trail between Main Street and Montgomery, just to make it as pedestrian friendly as possible. And I'll go back now to this site plan, which I think is one of the most interesting parts of this development. It definitely was very challenging, but I always like hearing from other developers the unique parts of their projects, and the site here is certainly, I think, for Montgomery, the most unique. So as Dara said, access was tricky. So you come in, if you can see the left side of the screen off of Bridge Street, and vehicular traffic sort of goes in this tight curve there. And then cars travel up through these parking levels, and up at the far end of the site is this town park that is now in existence, and it looks great. But as Dara said, a lot of the site floods. It's in the floodplains. Fortunately, we haven't had a flood since we've been involved, but we needed to make sure that in the event of a flood, there was sufficient parking outside of the floodplain, so that people had a place to put their cars, and so that there was an access way in and out of the site during a flood or other sort of emergency. So this canal walk up here between the building and the canal ordinarily is pedestrian only, but during an emergency, we're able to sort of remove the bollards that are there, and cars can travel in and out of the site that way. And then up here is the sort of overflow parking where people can park in the event that the rest of the site is underwater. And the other cool thing is that the lowest level of the building here, we have about half of it is dedicated to covered parking, and the rest is sort of basement space. And because it floods, obviously we couldn't put apartments there, and any uses that we wanted to put in place there needed to be able to withstand a flood. So we were able to incorporate some amenities, like we have a bike storage, we have a pet washing station, we have storage lockers, and we have another sort of bonus community room at the corner here with great views of the river. But everything is designed so that it can take on water. We're not trying to keep the water out. And it's, still usable space, even if we do have a flood.
So it's worth saying while we walk you to this next slide is that not all of this really came down, as I mentioned before, to the local leadership, and the Board of Selectmen was incredibly supportive, and two things that preceded us made that real. Besides the kind of advocating for moving the train station into downtown, there was already zoning present on the site. So there was a multifamily overlay zone that allowed this project to be approved as multifamily without sort of your traditional rezoning or sort of in-depth design review. We did do a design review. It was relatively low key by our standards in terms of local approval process, and that went really smoothly. But the other thing that the town did is they adopted this tax increment financing district, which was the first TIF district to be adopted after legislation changed at the state to make it more usable. TIFs have been around for over a decade in Connecticut, but have not gotten a lot of use because of the way it was structured. And Windsor Locks went forward and adopted a TIF district in the same downtown zone, including Montgomery, and that allowed us to leverage some financing, over $500,000 in financing through the savings that we got under the TIF guidelines. So that those were all precursors, again, to our being involved, but were indicators of local, really local support and thinking forward on seeing this development happen. I would also just do a shout out to Jen Rodriguez, who is the city staff person who sort of led the project all the way through from beginning to end. So couldn't have done it without any of that kind of support.
Yeah, the town was so amazing to work with. Okay, here's just a quick timeline of the project. Like Dara said, we started getting involved in Montgomery very early in 2016, and quickly for Beacon, I think, turned around a financing application less than a year later. We closed on the construction financing in December 2017, right after Christmas, and started construction a week later. And residents started moving in about a year and a half after that. And you'll note that construction wasn't done until December of 2019. So we were moving people into a building that was still partly under construction. And our management team did a really good job, and the residents were very understanding that, you know, wasn't necessarily ideal, but we were glad to get people in there. And we finished everything up at the end of 2019. And I can't see what this says, but as of August, I think that's the timeline. We were essentially leased up. So about a year after we first started moving people in, we were in really good shape lease up wise. So as of today, we're 96% leased up. All of the tax credit units have been qualified. The market rate lease up was very successful. We did all 78 units in about 8 months. And in almost all cases, we're getting rents well above what we had underwritten, which has been great. The residents, many of the market residents are renewing their leases. People seem to really like living there. People always ask us, do people complain about the train? And the answer is no. Actually, we haven't gotten any noise complaints about the train. It goes by several times a day. You can certainly hear it, but nobody seems bothered by it, which is very encouraging from a TOD perspective. And here are just some photos that we took during construction. So half of the building you can see is this brick, sort of traditional industrial mill style. It has the exposed wood ceilings, it has the exposed beams, and then the other part of the building is this concrete addition that they made in either 1910, 1920, which is a very different style. In some of the after photos, you'll see the difference there. So here, this is in the top left, this is our lobby and the property management office. We have a community room up on the top floor here. On your right are interiors. The top is the brick side of the building, the bottom is the concrete side of the building, and then obviously this exterior shot as well.
So, you want to keep going up, Em?
No, go ahead.
So just to continue while we have some of these pretty pictures up, a couple of other things that are worth noting. The historic credit allocation, both state and federal, is a pretty tremendous component of the financing here, and would not have allowed us to create the mix of affordability and the number of units we created without it. So in this case, it was a very powerful tool against both the state and federal historic credits. But it also, for those of you who remember the tax changes that were instituted by the Trump administration in 2018, like caused us, or end of 2017 was the thing that actually caused us to have to close in December, because the changes in the tax code would have affected the value of the historic credits starting in the beginning of the next year. So one of the reasons this project actually ended up moving so quickly to a closing is because it had to, because we would have lost millions of dollars in tax credit equity had it not gotten that commitment. And then Sheila Davis had asked 2 questions. Maybe can we unmute, Sheila, can you unmute yourself and you can go ahead and ask the questions directly? Just because we wanted to do that. Hi.
My neighbor is mowing the lawn, so it might be kind of loud.
That's okay. Yeah, no, we're fine.
Obviously, I live very close to my neighbor. Thank you for taking my questions. Yeah, you know, I think we all are concerned about the local support aspect of any project. So was it, my question, you might have alluded to it, but the idea that you had the TIFs or the financing were in place for that, was that, and you needed to, and they were interested in creating and putting this building back into the community. Was that one of the reasons it got such local support?
Yeah, so I'll say a few things, and Emily, you can fill in too. It is a lot easier to build local support when you're taking an abandoned, decrepit hulk of a building and turning it into something nice, particularly when it's in the center of town and nobody can ignore that it is really having a drag on the local economy. So we have plenty of stories when we've proposed either ground up development or redevelopment of an existing site where it has not been that easy. So suffice it to say that made it easier to begin with. That being said, the first selectman was incredibly active and engaged with us very early on, from the moment even before we got the site into a purchase and sale contract. And before we went to both the town for the site design, the design review process, and before we sort of were more public about what the overall project was going to be, he was very active with us, understanding what it meant, what affordability levels there were going to be, who, what employment and what kind of employees, and businesses were going to be served, and staff people who were going to be served by these units. Really telling the story of the mix of incomes, because half of these units are affordable, between 25 and 60% of area median income. And so we have some very low income units here, and we have some market rate units here. So certainly having the mix of income was appealing. And it took Chris, I think Chris would admit this himself, he was a little anxious about the number of affordable units early on, but really spent time trying to learn what that meant and who that would serve. And the working poor families who are going to live here are people who, work at the cleaners or, serve the coffee or are the part-time teachers. And when you look at the list of staff professions that we have in this building, you would just be amazed. We have people from doctors, high school principals, people in the insurance industry. We have a pilot. We have people who are, from every single, people who are driving, who are in the gig economy, like the whole range. And I think, he saw that potential. And then he's also very active on Facebook. And he made a big point of promoting the project and saying that he was behind it. So, even when we got some initial response that people were concerned about the number of units or the level of affordability, we got out in front of it, and he was with us there all the way. So that was a huge component of the success. And then you had a second question.
Go ahead.
Do you want to talk about the renting at different income levels and the challenges?
Sure. So Sheila's question, for people who can't see it in the chat, she asked if we could elaborate on the challenges in renting the apartments correctly by income level. And certainly, it certainly has been a little bit challenging. So as I said, we have apartments that are restricted to households at 25% AMI, 50% AMI, 60% AMI, 80% AMI, and then unrestricted market rate. And I think it's just, with so many different tiers, it's just in many cases a question of just finding the right people who make the income that falls within those sort of narrow parameters. And then you have to factor in, what apartments we have available and what bedroom size the applicants need. And so it can just be hard to get people that fit exactly what we have to offer. But like I said, we've rented up all of the tax credit units. So all of the units that are restricted to 60% AMI or lower, those are all rented. And then the 60 to 80% income tier is definitely the tier that we're having the hardest time filling. And that's not unique to Montgomery. We've had that experience at several other properties that we own and develop that have a similar tier. And I can't fully explain it. I'm sure Dara has her own thoughts on why that might be. I think sometimes people, they may fall into that income target, but they just don't want to deal with the certifications and the documentation they have to provide. So they just say, you know what, I'm just going to pay market rent. And I think the other tricky part that we've had here is just getting applicants that make, in that sort of narrow bands, just getting them to apply and finding them.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting because from a policy level and certainly local jurisdictions, everybody wants, quote, workforce housing. And I would be remiss if I didn't make the case that the tax credit program that funded the affordable units is actually workforce housing, because people earning 60% of area median income actually have to have a job and a working wage and pay hard rent. And so this is actually workforce housing, even at the affordable levels. That being said, that 60 to 80% level is often in many markets in Connecticut is actually very close to the actual market rent. So as Emily said, if I can pay market rent and maybe I'm paying $100 more, or I can get a slightly lower rent, and then I have to submit my tax returns and my all of my forms about my employment, my bank statements, and I have to be certified every year. It's a little bit of a burden. So and Windsor Locks is definitely kind of a market in which the rents in the marketplace are relatively modest. It's not a super high rent market, and so people have options at sort of equivalent rents. I think the one huge surprise on this project, as Emily articulated, like the market rents and the market rate units have leased up much faster and at higher levels than we ever expected. And I think that that's a testament to the product, the actual outcome of the design and the quality of the units and the building, and also the location, that heart of town on the Connecticut River, next to a future train station, nearby. A lot of things. And we got another question about the people coming from all over. We knew when we built this project, I mean, this is 160 units, which is a very large project for a town the size of Windsor Locks. So we knew we were going to be drawing regionally for people outside of Windsor Locks, because we could never, there just isn't enough demand within the city. We have also been surprised by how broad a draw it has had. I think we counted maybe 12 different states, people coming from out of state who are moving into Connecticut, found us, on the web and are moving here. And then people who work at the casinos in Springfield and in Amherst, and other people who are kind of coming from a wide variety of places. And we've been really pleased to have that kind of broad draw, and it has caused, the demand for the product again was much stronger and higher than we expected, given how small the market is, and sort of what it could have turned out to be.
Thank you very much. That helps.
Yeah. Alexandra, did we answer your question?
Hi, yeah. So I like that you were able to elaborate about how many different states people come from. I was more so asking in terms of what factor of the mill makes people from outside Windsor more drawn to it than people from inside. I feel like obviously people who are settled in Windsor, they're settled there for a reason. They have a spot that they like. But was there anything that was common for everyone coming from outside of Windsor where they were like, this mill had this that made me inclined to come here?
Emily, you want to?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, as Dara said, it's been really diverse, both in terms of the professions and where people are coming from and why they are moving here. it's just been a range. I wouldn't say that there's one particular factor that we've seen much more so than any other factor. You know, sometimes people just want to downsize. Sometimes it's someone's first apartment. They're moving out of their parents, or they just moved to the area, or whatever it is. It's really has been a variety of different reasons that have brought people to Montgomery, for sure.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and Alexandra, just the only other thing is this project is even for us. I mean, Beacon we have a pretty big portfolio, about 150 projects out that we own, and we've done a couple of adaptive reuse buildings, like historic rehabs like this, and actually all of them are sort of special in their own right. This one has the other, in addition to having this kind of monumental building that we were able to kind of reclaim and restore, the fact that it's on the Connecticut River. I mean, the views, both looking across the river and looking back through downtown across the canal, and then being at the base of a 4-mile state park where bald eagles nest, and you can go running and, you know, biking and whatever. I mean, you just don't, locations like this, buildings like this, kind of facts about projects like this don't come along that often. And I think it has shown up in the diversity of applicants and the strength of that pool of people who wanted to live there. So it's been great. And I think, you know, to be honest, it did surprise us, but it is a gem of a property.
Because, yeah, I totally have to agree with that, because there's a Panema Mill in Teffel, Norwich, where I live, that they also refurbished to also turn into affordable apartments for the area to help, you know, boost activity in the area. And it's right along the Shetucket River. So that's like a big attraction to that area, as well as the affordable housing and the other features that they provide there. I did a story on it for one of my journalism classes. So I'm very surprised at how similar the projects are.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Emily, is there more? I can't remember what happens next. That's
No,
it.
we just ended with the pretty pictures.
Dara, this is Sean. I have a question. Now, it may be too early to see this, but have you heard from the town, either town officials or merchants, of positive change from the influx of residents into the downtown?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, Emily, you probably have a better handle on the stuff. I mean, I will say during construction, like the local, you know, businesses had a hard time even keeping up with the contractors. But even so, I think we've seen some real change in the retail across the street.
Yeah, during construction, at least 2 businesses opened in the year and a half that we were there, or just almost 2 years. There was a brewery and a nail salon directly across the street from where we were, which was very exciting to see. And I know we have good figures. I couldn't recite them off the top of my head, but Connecticut Main Streets did a analysis, Patrick McMahon there, about the economic impact that just having over, you know, 160 plus residents living in town, and the amount of money that they spend and contribute to the local economy was really very impactful numbers, for sure. So I think it has made certainly a very positive difference there.
Absolutely. Any other questions out there in the world? All right.
Not seeing any.
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth saying that, again, a project like this doesn't really happen with the collaboration of a lot of different parties, but particularly with the state agencies that kind of all participated. It's worth sort of recognizing. I think we have colleagues from the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority on the phone, and just wanted to recognize that this couldn't have happened with everybody kind of coming together and deciding it was important. And, you know, again, projects like this don't happen with a lot of assistance. I mean, this isn't the kind of deal that would happen all unto itself. With the market can't do this. So to have the support of the various agencies, both on the brownfield side, as well as the housing finance and the historic credits, all really help to get this launched to become a reality.
Dara, I have one final question, which is,
Yeah.
so this experience, do you see, you know, mill rehabs like this, which obviously there's probably hundreds of opportunities of varying degrees across the region. Was this a really just a combination of all those right factors, or do you see it as viable for other sites, or does it really depend? I guess what I'm saying is it really dependent on all those underlying conditions being in place?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Sean. I mean, I think the question becomes, and this was even for us a question in Windsor Locks, is what the depth of market is in these different locations. I mean, in most of the places where mill buildings exist, they can be in very small towns, small communities. And if you're in a very small community, you're not going to be able to draw people who then will pay market rent, and sometimes you may not even be able to draw people who will pay an affordable rent. So it really does come down to whether you think you've got sort of a market area that is going to support the number of units that a building like this is created. We've looked at properties in like Vernon and other places in Connecticut where we were frankly anxious that we could, even there's a site up in Enfield that we've looked at a couple times, where we feel like even if you built to the capacity of this building or this site, who would come? And again, I think, Windsor Locks was central enough, and having the train station there was important, and being close to the freeway. There are like all sorts of things that made this attractive for a very diverse set of residents. That's not true at every mill, but again, if to the extent that the state is interested in continuing to see this happen, there are certainly, dozens of properties that might be eligible, and so long as you could convince yourself that there are people who want to live in that town, in that location, then they're worth doing.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all. If there aren't any other questions, thank you so much, Dara and Emily, for walking us through one of my favorite projects. So thank you all. And I believe that's the last. There's a session ongoing right now if folks want to jump in for the last half of it on the role of philanthropy and affordable housing. So thank you all.
Guys.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.